Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Darla Stuckey, Jim, and Ken for asking me to keynote, as well as our sponsor for this session, Diligent Board Member Services. One public service announcement, if we can get the presentation up. Proceeds from the sale of my book go to no-kill animal shelters and rescues. So if you happen to pick up a copy, I'd like to thank you guys in advance for helping me save a life. I've got good news and I've got great news about social for you guys today. The good news is we are talking about social. The great news is we are not talking about Facebook. That's not what this is about. What I want to do is I want to reframe social into a strategic business management discussion with you guys. And I want to do that initially around this number. In the very near future, there'll be 9 billion mobile subscriptions on the planet. Interestingly enough, there are only 7.5 billion people on the planet. So connectivity will continue to explode, but connectivity is also changing. We're starting to see connectivity not just between people, which is what Facebook made famous or infamous, if you will, but connectivity between people and the environment around us, and even connectivity, what we call machine-to-machine connectivity. So that's a big number, but not nearly as big as the number of possible connections amongst those connection points. 9 billion possible connection points on a network means that there's over 40 quintillion possible connections that can be made. Now, not everything will be connected, I realize that, but we'll be much more connected than we ever have been before as a species. And what's interesting is the connections are now spatially and temporally relevant. So space and time-based data is starting to flow across these connections. It's the first time we've bridged that last mile of connectivity, and that's what's the game changer. The 9 billion number also understates the number of devices that are connected. That 9 billion number comes from Ericsson. Cisco estimates that by 2015, we'll actually have 50 billion devices connected through the network. That unprecedented level of connectivity is what's driving the future. It's what's driving this concept of big data. So when you hear about big data, that's where it's coming from. And it's not just big data, it's new data because of the spatial and temporal relevance of this data. And so big data leads to big and new information. Big and new information yields big and new knowledge. We're at the cusp of a knowledge-based, an information and knowledge-based renaissance, I believe, that we've never had the opportunity to experience before, given this unprecedented level of connectivity. So let's talk about social technology. This is what my favorite definition of social technology. There aren't actually too many of them out there. Many of you view this as a social technology, the iPhone. Many of you view Facebook as a social technology, Twitter, Pinterest, iPads. These are all component parts of this current phenomenon of social technology, the cloud, the internet. All of these things make today's version of social technology possible. And this is not a typo. This is the first documented use of the word social technology over 100 years ago. So we were talking about this 100 years ago. Certainly there had to have been social technologies over 100 years ago, and there were. So what I did is I framed my research in the context of understanding this issue, my first rule of social technology. It's not about the tool, it's not about the technology, it's about the behaviors that are changing and being amplified with this technology. When behaviors change, things change. When behaviors change, markets change. When behaviors change, your business changes. And we've been through this before. So there's a history of social technology-driven disruption that we can learn from. And it's not about the tool. I want to reframe this away from the tool for you guys into the behaviors that are being altered and amplified. And so the 4 effects that social technology captures, what I call the 4 C's, it's how we connect, it's how we communicate, it's how we collaborate, and it's how we create and shape our communities. So let me ask you guys a question. With that frame as our backdrop and with that definition of social technology, and knowing that we've had other social technologies before, would anyone want to venture a guess as to what the first technology was? The first tool that we had that changed how we connected, communicated, collaborated, and created and shaped our communities. There's a free book online for whoever guesses the right answer, or gets closest to guessing the right answer. What was the first social technology? Just throw it out. Telephones? Printing press? Telegraph, the drum? Language, smoke signals. We have a winner. You're not that old. 800,000 years, you're not that old, Bob. You do. So I don't think this is a metaphorical example. I think this is a literal ancestor to what we're going through today. Fire is a story that changed and disrupted the world. It's a social technology that changed how we organized ourselves, changed how we communicated, changed how we got things done, altered a lot of other things along the way, and it changed our communities. About 800,000 years ago, we started to be able to control the fire. Before that, it was something we stumbled upon in nature, a burning ember, a tree that had been hit by lightning. We started to be able to control it about 800,000 years ago, to start it, to stop it, to move it, to exploit it about 800,000 years ago. And once we were able to do that, the fire itself became a communication vehicle. A fire on a rocky coast, a smoke signal, a lit candle in a window. It was a way that we used to communicate. And then it also shaped our communities. We used to gather around the fire. It was a central gathering spot. So it changed and enhanced the way we communicated. And then when we really got good at controlling it, we started influencing other things across our world. It changed farming, changed animal husbandry, changed how we made things. It was a very disruptive technology that we lifted and shifted into a lot of other domains. So without a doubt, this was a very disruptive experience, and I believe a social technology that we can learn quite a bit about. I heard two other examples out there, two other answers that cover two other thresholds of social technology innovation that we've gone through. One was about 600 years ago, with the invention of the printing press, and one was about 140 years ago with the invention of the landline telephone. Now, both of these technologies changed the way we connected, communicated, collaborated, and shaped and influenced our communities. So we've been through this before. So what can we learn from all of these prior experiences? And I think there's two messages that are extremely important to understand what the transformative power of today's social technology innovations are. They make us smarter and they make us more productive. They make us smarter because something called transactive memory is being enabled. That was a concept that Dan Wegner from Harvard started talking about in 1985. Transactive memory deals with the fact that the people in this room, the intellects in this room, they have the potential to be smarter, more creative, more innovative than any one individual is in the room. His research actually looked at spouses, husbands, wives, and families, groups of people that were together for a very long time, and just through sheer brute force had built up knowledge of each other's domain expertise. And just through sheer intimacy of those relationships, we're able to bring those knowledge bases together and then deploy them efficiently. So the trick with transactive memory is you have to be efficient in how you encode, store, and retrieve information. So it works with my wife and I. With 200 people in a room, it doesn't work because the engagement and the transaction costs are just too high amongst us as individuals. It's impossible to know what everyone else is expert at in this room, and it's impossible to deploy that efficiently. Until now. That's what today's version of social technology, that's what historical versions of social technology have started to leverage. Today's version of social technology is leveraging that at scale. If you look at the printing press, when the mass-produced written word was invented, the economies that adopted that grew at 4 times the pace of the economies that didn't. The productivity enhancements of that kind of information flow changes everything, changes communications, improves the quality of communications, advances our intellect. This is why this is a game changer. It's not something trivial, it's not a marketing issue, it's a business strategy issue. There's something else that's accelerating the effect as well, what I call the Z effect or the zero effect. So when you take transaction costs or engagement costs, how people communicate, how transactions process, as close to zero as they are now, the disruption accelerates. Just because there's no risk to the transaction, there's no cost to the engagement. So that's what we're seeing. So where it took 800,000 years for fire to disseminate and distribute, 600 for the printing press, 140 for the telephone, this version of social technology will disrupt much faster because of this issue. So what's this worth? What does this mean for business? McKinsey thinks it's $1 trillion issue. So those productivity enhancements, the creativity, the innovation that can be driven through this technology, they've done a very good, very detailed report that looked at global industry, global businesses, and this number is only against 20% of global business. It's actually a range of 900 billion to 1.3 trillion that they get. That they come up with against only 20% of global business. So the number is actually much, much higher than this. This is value that can be released from the current system through the use and deployment of this technology. Who captures that value? Still to be seen. But there's a lot of inefficiency in the system, as we all know, and the social technology has the potential to release it. And so why is that important for business? Because this is a tool. This is a disruptive technology, a disruptive tool. And that's what business competition is all about. This is not a toy. It's not a diversion. This is a weapon that changes your value proposition, changes the economics and the value drivers of your business. And it requires a shift in mindset amongst most boards, certainly, and executives that I talk to. But people need to start viewing, and executives and leaders need to start viewing their companies as computer-based interactive systems. This is the first period of time, and I've been in this business for 30 years when technology first started coming into the workforce. This is the first time the markets are ahead of companies in their use, adoption, and deployment of technology. We used to be the early adopters. You'd get the new and greatest stuff when you'd go into the office. It's not the case anymore. The new and greatest stuff is out there, and companies are lagging behind their markets and how this technology can be used and how they can use this technology to connect to the rest of the world. And this is why it's important. You have to shift your mindset and view the whole organization of the company as a computer-based interactive system. So what's led us to this point? I think what's led us here has been the last 100 years of business management history and practice. This has been something we've all been just making up for the last 100 years. It's all business management theory and practice has been. And if you break it down, and it's only 100 years old, Frederick Taylor's paper, The Principles of Scientific Management, he wrote in 1911. And if you break it down, I think there's been 3 discrete phases, and the next phase that's being driven by this technology is a logical extension of everything we've done before. But it takes a shift in mindset from a business management perspective and a change in business management. It's not just the technology that's going to make this happen. So if you look at the history of business management, it started with how do we get people together and get things done? How do we make it repeatable, make it reliable, and get things done? So it was all kind of about the work. It was breaking down work structures and producing things. And then in 1946, Peter Drucker came along and he studied General Motors. I think it was for 11 years, or it was a period of time. But his book, The Concept of Corporation, looked at how we do this at scale. So we had this demand-driven growth cycle, and how do we do this at scale? How do we organize ourselves at scale and do what Taylor taught us to do and get work done at scale? And then we realized, hey, wait a minute, we're doing this at scale now. We're really good at producing pretty much anything and everything that we want to a high level of quality and to a high level of efficiency. Hey, but there's the individual out there. How do we get more productivity out of the equation? Individuals have individual needs and wants. As consumers, they're very fickle. As employees, they're even more fickle. So whether you're an employee, a consumer, or an investor, how do we reach the individual and how do we approach this as 200 markets of one? And so what's happened is time has exposed the flaws in this historical approach. Change and volatility are the Achilles heel of the historical approach to business management. And we've kind of gotten to here, but we need something else now because the technology's demanding a different approach to business management. This historical approach has been very productivity driven. How do we get more out of the resource base that we have? Productivity, 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 outsourcing, offshoring, M&A, all productivity-driven initiatives, and that's dominated the headlines over the last 10 or 20 years. But it's the easy part of business management. The hard part is how do we create value? And I think we've neglected that part of the equation at the expense of the productivity part of the equation. So this age of the experience, when you've got the world on a technology platform, you've got to meet the world on that technology platform. When interactions and experiences are real-time and location-specific, you have to focus on the experience that you're delivering at a point in time and over time and time again to your markets. So it actually leverages this concept of markets of one, the individual. It leverages the concept of organizing at scale. And it leverages the concepts of getting things done efficiently and effectively. But it's something else now. You have to focus on the experience through this technology. So business management needs to change because the technology is demanding that it does. This is what it means to Nike, and it's fundamental not just across marketing, but across all different domains. When you have a relationship with a consumer, a direct connection with your markets, you don't need to advertise because you've got that connection. Advertising, broadcast messages, throwing a lasso on a marketplace and hoping you can pull something back. It's changing fundamentally how we look at business. What's interesting is the landline telephone never had more than 20% global penetration. Cell phones are about 85-90% penetration globally right now. So we've never had greater than 20% connectivity from a person-to-person perspective. But remember, connectivity is changing. It's now we're connecting to our environment differently, and our environment's connecting to itself differently. So this is entirely unprecedented. And it presents some new challenges, and it presents some fantastic opportunities. I've actually never been more excited about the potential of business, and I call this a business-led renaissance, because I think this can change the way we look at business, and it can change the way we look at the world and take us to a new plateau. So what's that starting to look like? Here's a couple of examples. Pepsi and Coke is doing a lot in this space as well with Salesforce.com, I believe. I think I know we have some Coca-Cola people in the audience. The experience of consuming a soda. You're like, okay, what does that mean? How does that change? How do we make that social? So Pepsi's changing that experience. Your toothbrush, connecting your toothbrush to the internet. On the surface, those seem pretty trivial, but if you follow the data and you follow the behaviors that can change off of that data, you start to see, well, does this change the dental care industry once we've got this level of connectivity and we start to connect this to the clinicians, to the dentists? How does this change the relationship you have with a consumer when you know who the consumer is that's just bought your product? A couple of other examples, if that doesn't convince you. Signage. Signage is going social. So when you walk past a sign, you've got an interactive relationship when you're there at the sign. So remember spatial and temporal relevance, and the sign knows who you are. This one must have known I was walking by because it's sending me to happy hour at the local pub and bar. I like that kind of sign. But the point there is follow the data, follow the behavior. Hotels, the hotel experience, interactivity, the relationship that this hotel has with us. Does it change the way they look at yield management when they have this level of intimacy with the people that are in the hotel? And they'll know when the people are in the hotel and who the people that are in the hotel are. The light bulb, the humble light bulb, the abstracted use of fire to control lighting. The humble light bulb is getting connected to this grid. So is that trivial? Maybe it is with one light bulb. If you have 5 billion light bulbs connected, is there a way to change the way we look at energy management? Still not convinced? Let me tell you about a company called Schoolbo. This is one I've got some direct experience with. I'm their acting, through Sasquatch, I'm their acting chief education officer here in the United States. We think we have the ability to eliminate illiteracy at a cost of no more than 10 cents per child around the world. There are currently over 1 billion people on the planet that still cannot read. 1 out of 7 people can't read on this planet, 600 years after the invention of the printing press. We think through this technology, we can reach people and teach them how to read. Just that initiative in and of itself, another billion people on the planet that can read, that can take part in the conversation, that can be a part of the future, that in and of itself is a foundational game changer. We know that when the printing press was invented, it lowered the cost of the written word. And when you lower the cost of the written word, it lowers the cost of becoming literate. So that's what this technology does. We think we can teach people for a cost of no more than 10 cents per person how to read. Still not convinced? This is what GE and GM are doing. GM, I mentioned before, Peter Drucker, Concept of the Corporation, an innovator in business management concepts. GE is putting $1 billion against this. They're calling it the industrial web. GM is making the car the center of this experience. So innovators, leaders, early adopters are putting a significant amount of money. We're starting to look at this as a discrete marketplace now. This number scales the market at $290 billion, and it's got a growth, a CAGR of over 30%. So this is happening. It's happening right now. It's just not, the future's never evenly distributed. But the leaders, the innovators, the people that get this are changing the future as we speak. This is my favorite slide in the book. The history of social technology teaches us that there's an adoption pattern to these technologies. They get discovered, then they proliferate like wildfire, and then because they've proliferated and we know that they're going to be around for a while, we start to figure out how they work and we start to control them. But authority structures also start to regulate them. So that's two sides of the control coin. And then what happens is they start to fragment. They start to be pulled back into niche domains, like the fire was pulled into the house from the community fire pit. They start to fragment, and we start to use the technology to change specific things that we do in our day-to-day lives. Schoolbo is a great example of that, because it's what we're doing with Schoolbo is we're creating a social network between parents, grandparents, teachers, and children. It's a specialized social network that's focused on the child's development, that's focused on the child's learning. So we're taking that time away from the community spot of Facebook, and we're putting context around it that has a lot more meaning. And that always happens with social technology. Then we get dependent upon this stuff. It just becomes a part of our life. And then guess what? It disappears, it vanishes. But it's everywhere. It just stops being part of the conversation. We're surrounded by fire in this room. It's just been abstracted out of the way. It becomes subsumed by larger systems. The incandescent light bulb is an example of our incredible ability to control a combustion process. And so it's all around us, but it disappears. By 2020, we won't really be talking about social, but social will be everywhere. And Zuckerberg agrees with me. Interestingly enough, this was just in Wired in May of 2013. So the big stuff isn't the big stuff of Facebook anymore. The big stuff is the little stuff. How we're lifting and shifting these tools and techniques of social into different domains. I'm in the home stretch here, guys. I have 10 predictions in the book. These are 4, and I'll get to my number 1 prediction in a moment here, but they range from the rise of information poverty through to social CEOs rebooting political leadership, and so they're driven off of these forces that are at play. The rise of information poverty is really about the North Korea effect. So increasingly, when we're all connected, if you can't participate in that information flow or in that world, if you decide not to, we'll increasingly start to see economic success and failure, economic poverty aligned with information poverty. It's one of my predictions. Rise of the court of social governance, something very near and dear to your heart. There's a new sheriff in town. It's called collective action. The ability to collectively act through this technology. We've seen this with the Arab Spring. We've seen this with some skirmishes from consumers, 100,000, 150, not liking what the Chick-fil-A CEO says, not liking what other executives say, and organizing themselves, self-organizing and using the technology to create an issue. We're going to see this at scale very, very quickly. I predict that we're going to see a mass customer exodus of 1 million to 2 million people in the next 2 years, because we all have the ability to collectively act now through this technology. The transaction and the engagement costs of collective action have vanished. We can now organize ourselves. And we saw that in the Middle East. We continue to see that in the Middle East today. Collective action is also the enemy of authority frameworks. If you go back to Plato's Republic, the design of society and the design of business has always been the few decide for the many. It's not the case anymore because of collective action. Unions, proxy firms have always been designed to organize the masses against the few. The masses can now organize themselves. I think this is a huge issue with a lot of unintended consequences for us from a governance perspective all the way through a social perspective. We talked about this in terms of how social abstracts and social CEO reboots political leadership. Given the global dysfunction of the political system, I think we're going to see the authenticity, the transparency, the exposure that business executives get through this renaissance redefine what it means to be a political leader. I think they're going to prove themselves in that context, and they're going to be elevated through by us. I hope that happens, and I know other executives that are thinking along those lines as well, but that's very much in need of a reboot. And finally, as I come to my conclusion, my number one prediction is social innovation will drive a major breakthrough. The ability to enable transactive memory at scale, I think, is creating a creative and innovative, a knowledge-based renaissance, and we'll be able to solve some problems because of the power and the ability and the efficiency we have to enable that concept of transactive memory. Remember, we've never even gotten close to doing that before. We can now do it at scale, and I think we're going to see some really creative things and some big problems get solved as a result. So in conclusion, the future is now being open sourced, and these four forces, I'm sure it happens whether we want it to or not. So let me leave you with a final thought. The future is being open sourced. The only thing is we have to decide what we do with that opportunity. Thank you very much. Have a great event.